tempest blow by order from thy throne, while all that borrows life from thee is ever in thy care, and everywhere that man can be, thou God art present there. Amen. We shall assemble on the mountain. We shall assemble at the throne, with humble hearts into his presence. We bring an offering of song, glory and honor and dominion, until to the King, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing the song of the redeemed. We shall assemble on the mountain. We shall assemble at the throne, with humble hearts into his presence. We bring an offering of song, glory and honor and dominion, until to the King, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing the song of the redeemed.
Going on till right now. It's now on, so everybody can hear us. It's good to see everybody this morning. Let me remind you of a couple prayer needs. We don't have any new updates that I know of, but continue to remember the Tuggles. They remain in Farmington with plans on going to Texas this week. We hope they're able to do that. Tomorrow's Nita's birthday, so if you have a way to contact her, you might wish her happy birthday. Cornell is the preaching student from Tennessee that we've remembered that's had COVID. He had a bit of a setback this week, went to ICU. That's the latest that we've heard. We hope that he's improved and will continue to improve. How's your uncle doing?
They moved me to hospice.
Okay. So about the same.
Yeah.
Let's continue to remember Pat Medina. This is Edna's uncle that we have been praying for. Do we have any updates or any new people that we can add to our list? It's good to have Nancy here.
Yeah, definitely. They just left Boise. They're driving from Oregon here, hauling a trailer, travel trailer, with 3 kids. Yeah.
This is our family
They don't
headed.
travel. They never really traveled anywhere. So, have everything just go safe for them.
Pray for them and all family that's traveling this week. Anyone else? Let me lead us in prayer. Father, we're grateful today to be here, grateful to share together in this worship and study as brothers and sisters. We just ask for your blessing as we engage together today. Be with those that we've just named. We especially ask that you be with Nita and Clifton. As they're away from us, we ask that you would just bless them with health and with well-being. Father, we ask that you continue to be with Cornell, that he might recover from his illness. And we ask that prayer on behalf of all that are suffering with COVID. We ask that you would make them well. And all of the other ailments that are going around, flus and colds and various things that we face during this time of year. We would ask that you continue to be with the Medina family and with Pat during his illness. We ask that you be with those that are traveling today and over the next few days to be with family. We ask that you would bring protection as people are out on the roads and in the air and other ways that people travel. Father, we are grateful for this week and the blessing we know that it'll be to all of our families. Again, we ask that you be with us now as we look at your word. Bless us with understanding, Father. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We'll be turning to the last chapter of Proverbs. We are at the end of our study. And we'll end it tonight, or today rather. Next week we're going to start 2 Corinthians. And we'll spend at least in the month of December in that book, so be looking at it. On the back table we've got some magnetic calendars. It's got our name, Gallup Church of Christ, address, and so forth on there, phone number. Got lots of these, so take them, give them to people if you'd like. Be a form of advertisement this year for us, and also something practical you can put on your fridge or wherever you want to post it. Okay, making sure I've got the microphone on. When I've recorded down here before, I've left the microphone off, so nobody's heard us. But the microphone is on. Well, last week we had gotten to the very beginning of Proverbs 31. We looked at the first few verses, I think down to verse 7. We have a new person here, at least in the name that's given to us. We're told in verse 1 that this chapter contains the sayings of King Lemuel. We really don't know who Lemuel is. Some think it may be a pseudonym for Solomon, for whatever reason. Him giving himself a new name in this chapter, or whoever compiled these Proverbs into writing gave him a new name, we don't know. Could be somebody else that we don't know the identity of. We don't have another reference to this name in the Bible, Lemuel. So it's just kind of odd that it just pops up here in chapter 31. It's much like chapter 30, where we had Agar named, and the sayings that were in that chapter were attributed to him. We don't know who Agar is either. But that's really a minor point compared to what he has to say, because there's some good things that Lemuel has for us. Notice again what he says about what he's going to say. These are things that he learned from his mother. So his mother taught him these things, and then Lemuel is now passing it along to all of us. And I imagine if we were able to talk to the mother, she would probably say the same thing. I learned these things from my mother or grandmother. And that's the nature of these wise sayings that we've looked at in Proverbs. They're not really original to anybody other than perhaps God, if you go far enough back, because all of this is wisdom from Him in His Spirit. But it's wisdom that's been passed along from generation to generation. And that's something we've seen all through this. And to me, that's probably the primary lesson of the book of Proverbs, is that one generation teaches the next. That's how we all learn. That's how we grow. That's how we're able to live in a way that's productive and meaningful and so forth. And as parents, we know the value of that, because we can think back to when we were children and how we benefited from our parents and grandparents. We've taken those same things, I imagine, as our children have grown, and we've given them to them. And those of us that are now grandparents, which I think is everybody in this room, we hope that our children are then passing that along to their children and so forth. And so that's an important thing to pick up on here in Proverbs. Well, let's look at verse 8. Verses 8 and 9. We have a single saying here, and then we'll get into verse 10 and following, which is all one subject. Verses 8 and 9, the mother has told Lemuel, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. For the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy." So the mother is telling her son, be a good person. Look after those that are in need, those that have some concern in life. More specifically, she says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. In other words, be a defender of people. We look around at our world today, and that's a lot of people, isn't it? That either can't speak for themselves or maybe can't do for themselves for whatever reason. We are to be people that are on the lookout for those and to be ready to help. We're to be a defender of the rights, it says, for the rights of all who are destitute. Well, everybody has rights. A right to happiness, a right to a good life. We ought to be champions of that. We're to speak up, she says, verse 9, and judge fairly. As we look at people, we need to judge fairly. And then she says again, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Our society needs to hear that. There's a lot of people that fall through the cracks for whatever reason. And I think that's one of our chief responsibilities as Christians, is to look after them. In fact, think about the book of James. James says something is true religion. Do you remember what he said was true religion? Taking care of widows and orphans in their distress. Religion's not just about coming into a building, sitting down and singing a few songs and going through a service and then going home. That's actually a very minor part of what we do. The major part of what we do is we're good people. And we look to be a blessing to people and to serve people and to love people. I think it all goes back what Jesus said, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. He also said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Then he says the second command is much like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the foundation of this. That's the type of people we're to be, and that's what this woman, this mother, has taught her son. And, we think about the important lessons our children can learn. This is probably the tops. Teaching our kids to look after each other and look after other people. Imagine how much different our world would be if we all taught our kids that way. First of all, we acted that way, and we taught our kids to act that way.
Training with a child, they say that before a child is 2, you learn half of what you're going to learn in a lifetime.
That's right.
So does that mean that when they're older, it just takes forever and forever?
It does take a little, they forget things, don't they? There's a saying, I can't remember the exact wording, kids are slow of hearing. You teach them something at 12, they might remember at 40 what you heard, what you taught. And so it takes a lot of patience.
I'm very grateful for the mothers. When men are working hard, the mother's cooking, cleaning the house, taking care. And I think the great thing that a mother has for the sons is that close relationship. The men have with their sons, close, but the mother has a different relationship where the sons would come, and talk to them and feel comfortable saying things. And I'm so grateful for the mothers, because it's overwhelming sometimes, everything that they have to do. And I don't take it for granted, everything my wife has done for my family. And I'm so grateful that, the kids always say, we love our mother, and I'm so grateful hearing that, it's a great thing.
Well, it is a special bond our mothers do have with both our sons and daughters.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, you look at families and the dynamics of a father with his children, a mother with their children. There are some differences there. And that's why God's design for family is so important. A man and woman coming together and beginning a family, we both have things to offer that are really irreplaceable. And I think that's part of the problems we see in society. So many families are not that way. And that doesn't mean we look down at them. In fact, this verse really comes into play. We have a niche to fill. I think one of the ways that churches can help families, particularly single families, whether it's a single father, single mother, as a church, we are an extended family. We can kind of step in where there's voids and have people step into our lives where there's voids. We help each other that way. And I think that's part of where this is going. Well, that leads into verse 10. And from verse 10 all the way to the end of the chapter is one of those sections of Scripture that we often hear quoted, usually at Mother's Day, maybe some other times during the year. But I don't know that we really spend much time thinking about it. This section's entitled, most of our Bibles, something to the effect of the wife of noble character. So it's going to be a poem basically about women, although I think it actually looks beyond that. I think we limit it when we just mention about a woman, but it's certainly starting from there. And again, think about the setting. We've got this man's woman, this king's mother, rather, King Lemuel's mother, who has given him these wise sayings. And so I get the feeling that this is part of what she was trying to teach her son as she was preparing him to then go out and meet that woman in his life. I don't know that we spend enough time as parents preparing our kids for their future relationships and marriages. I think nowadays we kind of are hands off on that. I know I've been too hands off on that probably with my daughters, thinking, okay, well, they're smart, they can figure it out. But as parents, we have a responsibility, I think, to at least direct our kids in the type of people that they're thinking about.
Okay, so in Jesus' time, they worked men that were like 30, so
Yeah.
that's for,
So it's a little bit different, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe better, because it took longer to grow up, maybe. In some ways, but actually the Jews thought of adulthood in two different settings. If you were a boy at 12 years old, today it's called bar mitzvah. Basically, you were made a member of the congregation, of the synagogue. And it meant you had standing in the synagogue where you could participate in the act of learning. You know, you could question the rabbi in public. You could speak and do those type of things. That's different than our society. We don't really have an age 12. Maybe it's 18 now. Maybe it's 21. We really don't have a firm age anymore. But it is true that when you were 30, you were really a member of standing in the community. And so that was kind of a second stage of adulthood. For women, it was a bit different. Usually, their sense of adulthood started with marriage. But their marriages were different than ours. Usually, a young lady was already pledged to be married when she was 3 or 4 or 5 years old. When she was 14 or so is when she actually entered the formal, we would call it engagement period or betrothal. And that would last for a year, maybe 2 years. And then she would be married by the time she was 15 years of age. The man, by the way, was usually 18 to 20 when he was married. But that was when the woman was considered to be an adult. Of course, nowadays it's a little bit different.
You know, I probably told this story before, but when I was young, my dad always talked about manhood. So when I was 5 years old, I told my dad, I'm a man. My dad looked at me and rubbed my head, okay. And then I became 10 years old. I was looking forward to become a man. I told my dad, I'm a man. I said, well, what does it take to be a man? So I was about 16 years old, had a little girlfriend, had a little mustache. I said, Dad, I'm a man. Dad said, no, not yet, son. And then I started kind of worrying, you know. And then when I got married and I took responsibilities for my own action, then my dad finally came and told me I was a man. Because now I was doing what I needed to do as a man. Before everybody said they're a man, but they're not doing, you know, the shoulder. But then when I was in a position to got married, had my first son, paying my bills, doing everything I need to be to become a man, that's when my dad told me I was a man.
That's kind of the standard we need. It's about what we're able to do, you know, the maturity that we show, more than the number of candles on a cake. See, it's not about age, it's about what we are. Well, let's look at what the statement is here about a wife of noble character. Again, it's this mother who has taught her son these things. Telling him, well, this is the type of person you need to be looking for. And I get the sense she had probably been telling him this since he was very young. Because you wait too late, it's too late, isn't it? You really got to start ingraining these things in your kids early on. And I would imagine that this woman, as she's describing this, she's describing herself. Describing her mother. This is what she's learned. Let me read the whole thing and then we'll work through it. Verse 10, a wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She's like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it's still night. She provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor. She extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes a seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies the merchants with sashes. She's clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. And her children arise, they call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Well, those are the final words here, Proverbs 31. I think probably the best way of looking at these words is much like an impressionistic painting. I've used this example before. An impressionistic painting is where the artist takes paint and basically dabs the paint on the canvas, not with much definition or detail, but in the dabbing of the paint, as the full painting comes into view, you can see things, you can see objects. For instance, Monet was an impressionistic painting. One of his famous paintings is the boat on the pond. And as you stand back and look at it, well, it looks like a boat on the pond. There's trees and there's a sun and so forth. Very beautiful painting. But if you get up really close and try to look at the detail, it just looks like dabs of paint. It doesn't look like anything. You've got to stand back and look at the whole thing. And I think that's helpful with sections like this, because what happens a lot of times, we'll come to Proverbs 31 and we'll read this, and particularly maybe the women will look at this and say, well, this is a pretty challenging list of things I'm supposed to be. And you get overwhelmed by it. And it almost becomes discouraging. I've heard that response from people as they've read this. I can't be this. This is Superwoman. I can't do these things. Well, I don't think it's meant to paint Superwoman. What I think it's meant to do is give us a general impression of who this woman is to be. And I don't think it's really just talking about woman either. I think men too need to take note of what's being said here. But it's this impressionistic view of what we're to be like. And so I think what's happening is we have some general qualities, not some specific things that we are to be about, but some general ideas of what it means to be a mother and a wife. With that in view, what are some of the qualities that are mentioned here?
She's resourceful.
Definitely resourceful. There's a few things that bring that idea in mind. She goes and gathers the things her family needs, and she's very deliberate about that. She's very specific about it. She wants the best for her family.
She's a businesswoman.
She's a businesswoman. Okay. How else could we describe that attribute? What do business people do?
Make money.
Well, they make money, but more than that, what does a business person do?
They buy and sell.
Okay, they buy and sell to what end?
Manage.
Okay, they manage.
They manage people, they manage things, they
Okay.
manage products, like her linen that she made and she sold it, and she, little odd things that you do on the side that keep
Okay.
things going.
It's not just a pastime. She's managing the affairs of a family. Jennifer?
She has a role she has a role to fulfill.
Okay. Yeah, if she wasn't doing those things, what would happen to the family? It'd fall apart. There'd be a vacuum there, a void there.
Relationship to her husband too.
Do what now?
It talks about her relationship with her husband,
Okay,
that he lacks for nothing.
okay. Yeah, she's there to provide and to help. And he too, because again, I think we're to see the other side of this too, through what she's described as. So she's resourceful, she's a manager, she's got responsibilities. She's industrious. We could say that about the idea of being a businesswoman. She's industrious.
She delegates too, because she has other people do things to make
Okay.
things happen.
That's part of the management aspect, that she's not doing all the work herself, but she's making sure it's done. Competent, I like that idea. There's some talent there, there's some competency there. She knows what to do. How does she know these things?
She was taught to be an example.
She was taught. That's the implication of this, is she just didn't learn these things overnight. She saw her mother do these things, and her grandmother, Again, it goes back to what we were starting out with, that that's how people learn. We can learn good and bad that way. We can pick up on bad habits, and we often do that through what we observe. But we can also pick out good habits too.
I saw my great-great-grandmother and my grandma and my mom. I saw all the females in my family getting up right when the sun is coming up.
Okay.
They would greet and meet the sun every morning, and the day would start by I seen them praying outside as they meet the sun, praying to God, and then they would start the morning by building the fire and cooking for the family early in the morning. I saw that throughout my whole life as a little girl, as a teenager. So that's what we're expected to do.
Sure. Yeah, you witnessed it and you learned it.
Yeah.
What quality of spirit would that be? Those type of things that you saw?
Joyful.
Be joyful, because there's a joy in it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's about others, so there's a servant heart.
Service.
There's another quality I'm thinking of, especially the idea of getting up and greeting the sun. Well, industrious, but there's another term.
Well, they take care of their spirituality first. I mean, pray to, they get up and they didn't really talk about it in this thing, but, taking that time to set your day the way it's going to be.
Okay, so there's priorities there, but there's something else. If you're going to get up and greet the day, what's that going to take to have you do that?
Discipline.
Discipline. Is that the word? Yeah, it's discipline or self-control. You see that through all of this. She's very focused on what she's doing. Now, I imagine this woman had lots of fun, although you notice that word's not used. We don't have hobbies here. She's very focused on taking care of her family. Now, we don't need to be consumed by that, because we've seen that extreme where somebody's consumed by tasks and duties, and what usually happens to a person like that? Burnout. You got to have some balance in life, and I'm sure this woman has that. But there's self-discipline there. There's a commitment to the task. What other qualities do you see here in this list? How about the idea of generosity? We kind of touched on that a couple of ways, but this woman's selfless in what she does. She's serving the needs of her family. She's also looking after those beyond her family that may be in need. And that actually goes back to verses 8 and 9, when the mother of Lemuel said, be this kind of person. Well, she's now describing this person. She is somebody that looks after the poor. Yeah, definitely selfless. What other qualities?
We were just talking about moms and I'm not saying anything bad about them, but when we were raising kids, that was your task. Your moms were at home, and some of these younger women are like, oh, I need date night, oh, I need this, I need that, and we never thought of stuff like that.
Yeah, culture's changed, hasn't it? And I don't want to say it's good or bad, because I think there's some goodness in that too. But there's got to be a balance in life. There really has to be, and you've got to be able to define that according to your needs and your place in life. Yeah, she built relationships.
She didn't just, and that's what date night's about, is having relationships.
Sure.
Making sure you continue your relationship.
Sure.
building relationships. Everybody can be so busy doing so many different things, they don't stop and build relationships.
Think about families that you've known and couples that you've known that maybe from all appearances looked like they were the super couple. They had it all together. They had perfect kids, seemed like they had a perfect life, and then the bombshell. They divorce or they split. And you look into that and you figure out, well, yeah, they were doing all the right things, but they really weren't together as a couple.
They wasn't focusing on themselves.
They drifted apart. And so there needs to be a self-care.
What talks about her children and her husband,
Mhm.
She had to build relationships,
Yeah.
Children don't rise up and call you blessed if you didn't build a relationship.
That's right. Yeah, and it's not just because she did all the right things that they did that. She showed love and care for them.
Yeah, and we're not perfect. I mean, as a person, so as a couple, we have our problems too.
Sure.
And yes, you have to kind of focus on the core, because if you don't have a good relationship with your husband, you can't do
That's right.
all of this stuff. Not
Or you can't do it long.
right.
Yeah. That's why I use the word self-care, because that's a lot of this. We do take care of ourselves personally, but as a couple, as a family. And I think we see this in her, that she's doing that. What else do we see of this woman? What other kind of qualities?
It says that she can laugh at the days to come.
Okay. I think that goes back to the idea of joy.
Well, and knowing that, you do all these things, but what's really important is your relationship with God, and your family, and other people in the community.
Okay.
She's very intelligent because she opens her mouth with wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. She speaks well, doesn't she? She definitely fears God, most certainly. And I think that's the root of everything she does. What else do we see? Well, let's look at the last couple of verses. Verses 30 and 31, I think, give us a summary of how this woman's described, but then also we have a lesson attached to it. Verse 30 says, "Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised." What are we being taught there? We use the phrase today, beauty is skin deep. It's basically what this is saying, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, your standard of beauty better change, shouldn't it, over time?
And charm is deceptive, I mean, it's like flattery is not a good thing.
Okay.
Everybody can be deceived.
There's got to be something inside, isn't that what we're being told? And what's the core here?
But I think it's very important for a man to tell the wife how beautiful she is.
Well, definitely.
It's very important, because when they're getting older or whatever, they think they're not less attractive or whatever. But you always tell them how much you love them, how beautiful they are. And it really brings up their spirit.
And notice we're told that verse 28, her children arise, call her blessed. So the children are praising mom, but the father too. Her husband, we're told also, he praises her. We're in Proverbs 31, by the way, those that have come in. So we need to affirm goodness that we see. We all kind of thrive on compliments, don't we? I know I don't give enough. I like to hear them. We need to share with others those words we can to encourage and to uplift. Look at verse 31, the last verse. "Honor for her all that her hands have done, and let her works be her praise at the city gate." What do you think it means when it says, "Honor her for all that her hands have done"?
Give her her due. I mean, in a lot of other countries, and even here, women are secondhand citizens.
Yeah.
Usually behind a man, there's better women.
Yeah. We need to give honor where it's due, don't we? How do we do that? Is it just simply compliments, or does it go beyond that?
Well, the Lord made her to be a helpmaker to her husband,
Okay.
and here she does all of it. She
Okay.
represents the majority of the expectations, so, and she, above all of that, she loves the Lord.
Okay.
she loves the Lord, and because of all that, then she's being blessed and praised.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. God is at the core of who she is. But how do we honor her? Again, we're to honor her for all that her hands do. How do we honor that special person? It may not just be our mothers or wives. How do we honor good things that we see in people? Okay. Try to be supportive.
Well, women are different when it comes to stuff like that.
Okay.
A little praise for a woman goes a lot farther than
Yeah. Maybe that's the problem with men and egos, maybe. They need to be stroked a little bit more. But how else can we bring honor to her?
You know, my wife likes gifts.
Okay. All right.
Give her some gifts.
Gifts are good, aren't they?
Take her shopping.
We all like that. We all like that. All the above. How else? Respect, definitely. That's a big one, isn't it? Yeah. And how do we show the respect?
What she says.
Okay, do what she says. Okay.
Listen.
Listen. Okay. How else?
Make sure she's happy.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Make her feel special all the time.
All the time. Okay. Okay. You know, here we've got the idea, and it goes back to what we started off with. It's one generation teaching another. So the objective is to not make a carbon copy of ourselves, but to pass down values that we learned from the previous generation because we realize those values are good. And that those values have led to good things in society and so forth. And so I think a form of respect or honor is to actually then do those things. You know, we mentioned obey, but it goes beyond obey. It's becoming that type of person. That's one way to honor, and that's one way to respect.
children learn by watching.
Yeah.
So when you have a good relationship at home, they'll take that and know what kind of.
You know, you mentioned a moment ago that kids learn most of what they know by age 2 or 3. You know, how are they learning those things? Observation. You know, they're not reading it out of textbook. They might be hearing things, but they're learning because they're seeing. And I think that's the disconnect we have in a lot of our families is, you know, we may be teaching our kids to do some things, but are we living those things ourselves?
What I say, not what I mean.
Exactly. We're usually hypocritical, aren't we? And so our kids get mixed signals. What do they learn? Well, they learn what we do more than what we say. Hopefully those are on the same wavelength.
And you have to be very careful about that too, because you could turn your kids off.
Oh, very much so.
You know, if you're preaching one thing and then you're doing another thing, that really turns them off.
You can make them very bitter. You know, they see you as a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Why would I want to be that way? Or what value is in there in any sense of learning if there is that hypocrisy? Now, I want us to end with the last 5 minutes or so talking about this idea of how we prepare our kids, because I think that's part of the message here. You know, again, this is the mother of this King Lemuel. Again, we don't know who King Lemuel is. Maybe Solomon, could be somebody else. But she's teaching her son about the type of woman he needs to look for. Because notice verse 10 again, she says, a wife of noble character, who can find? She's worth far more than ruby. She's saying to her son, you need to go out and look for this type of person, and she's going to be rare. You know, it's not going to be the first person you find, probably. You're going to have to be diligent in your search. And that goes back to something we saw at the very first of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1. Remember where you got this father, again, it's Solomon, speaking to his son. First 9 chapters are that. And he's preparing his son for various choices that he's going to have to make in life as he sets out on his own. And one of the common elements in those 9 chapters is how the son deals with women. The type of women he associates with and so forth. That's the biggest choice that the father's preparing his son to do. Well, notice how Proverbs ends. It's the mother now, basically saying the same thing. Jennifer.
I was gonna say, and I was just reading like 5 times in Proverbs, it talks about it, man and wife.
Yeah.
It's better to live on the roof.
Yeah, we brought those up and kind of laughed at them, but you think back at the context, the father is preparing his son, and it's the flip side of that too, because it's the mother preparing her daughter too. You know, we have a role as parents to prepare our kids for love and relationships and so forth.
You know, I think one thing that my sons always tell my wife a lot is when they're looking for a young woman to marry, they look at attributes that the mother had that were good. And they try to find a woman that has certain attributes like their mother.
Okay.
And I think that's very important, you know, when you're looking for a wife or a husband looking for a man looking for a woman. It's the attributes of your father. I mean, you're looking for, a woman's looking for the attributes of the father in the sense of the loving, the teaching, the caring, hardworking. They're looking for things like that when they're looking, you know, to get married.
Well, and that goes back to the modeling. You know, have we been the type of parent, the type of spouse that we can then show our children? Of course, I imagine if you ask our children who they were looking for in a mate, they would say, well, I'm looking for my dad, or I'm looking for my mom. Now, subconsciously, I think they are. They're looking for those qualities that they've come to love, but they won't admit to that. But I think one of the tricks that we have as a parent, not a trick, but a job, is to point our kids in the right direction. And that begins when they're very young. You know, that begins as we prepare our kids to go out and make friends. You know, do we deliberately, consciously seek to shape our kids that way? You know, to tell them, well, this is the type of people that you need to value. These are the type of qualities you need to look for.
Well, it tells, I know my parents would always say, you don't map out
Yeah,
God, the same God.
yeah.
Into a relationship where
And that's a big one, isn't it? You know, the faith that we have, the God that we have. And a lot of times as kids, we don't want to hear that. But there's truth in that. What other things can we do as parents to prepare our kids for those choices?
Well, have natural consequences of the choices they make.
Okay? Part of that's to allow them to fail maybe at times.
Every time that they make a mistake,
Okay.
they need to learn from
There's
it.
consequences,
So
yep,
there are natural ways, like if
Sure.
you don't do your homework, you fail.
sure.
You don't get into the school you want to get into. If you don't do, if you don't do your laundry, you don't have clean clothes to wear, or you have an allowance and you spend it all on, at least you went to the flea market and spent our whole money on a gun. And so, you don't have money. You're gonna have to come up with a way to come up with money. You're gonna have to go find odd jobs to do if you want money,
So there's tough love there
Well, that's
involved.
not really tough love, it's just reality. If you spend your money on one thing and don't pay your bills, then guess what? You haven't been credit report. You have, it's consequences of everything you do. If they learn that from up and not let them, try to shield them from those type of things, they learn. Your kids learn, they will learn.
It's harder to teach that when they grow up.
It's, you're too late then.
That's what I mean.
I mean, yeah.
Well, any other thought we can give to this? Because we are at time here.
I think it's good to be honest with your kids.
Okay.
Tell them the truth. Don't, if things are not right or they're not going in the right direction or whatever, you have to be honest with them. You don't try to flatter them. If something's wrong, you have to, tell them the truth.
Okay.
And I think truth overcomes anything else.
Okay. I think that's very true. Any other thought?
I always tell my kids that I prayed for them since they were babies, that God will bless them, and walk with them and guide them, and especially when they get ready to look for a mate, I always remind them, I've been praying for you all your life since you were a baby, that God will help you, bless you with a beautiful Christian person to marry. And I still remind Daniel, I'm still praying for you that God will bless you with a Christian wife, but you got to go look in the right places.
I think that's wonderful advice. Pray for our kids. Let them know that. Gerald.
Yes, parents have a very, very strong role to play in raising children. However, let's not forget about the role that we grandparents have.
Most definitely.
Because in many cases, parents are around those teenagers 24/7.
Yeah.
And every now and then, they don't want to listen. But when they're around a grandparent, and we can reinforce that parent's thoughts,
Yep.
it has a tremendous benefit from my perspective.
No, I totally agree with that. You know, a lot of times I can think back when I was a kid, you know, you get tired of your parents. They get tired of you, I'm sure, too. But you always kind of brighten up when you see that grandpa or that grandma. There's just a different type of relationship there. That's why I wish families were more connected than we are. I mean, we're all separated now. You know, our family's in 4 different states. We're coming together this week. It's the first time we've done that ever in the case of 4 of the grandchildren we have, because of the distance that's involved. But we need to have that connection. Well, let's end there. I know there's probably some other good things we can say, but that's the end of our study of Proverbs. It's taken us, I think, 6 months to study it, but I think it's been worth our while. Next Sunday, we're going to start a study of 2 Corinthians. So in this class, that's where we'll be. So read ahead if you can. We'll spend a few weeks in that book. Let's take a break now for a few moments. If you're listening online, I'm going to end up stopping the live stream because I'll have to restart it at the other podium. So there will be a break for just a couple of minutes. We do have coffee and donuts down the hall. Make yourself at home.